Hey there, welcome back. Here we are again. This time though we'll be working on the verbal part of the SHSAT. Now this is a bit different because I usually cover math, but I think it's a good idea to start beginning verbal. And we're not going to study it completely. What we're going to do is break it down into 3 portions. I teach math the same way, breaking it down into the different branches of math, and we're going to do the same with verbal. Now, this is going to be sort of broad, because if you go online and type in SHSAT verbal, or any part of, suppose you type in logical reasoning or reading comprehension, you'll find a couple of videos on YouTube. But what's going to be different about this video is that it's broader. And it might not seem at first to be very helpful, but doing practices like the ones I'm going to give you will indeed help you out a lot. So I'll try to explain it very broadly and make sure you have a very good understanding, and try to stick to the topic and follow along. Have with you a pen and paper, alright? And so I looked at the books. I'm using the McGraw-Hill book, or is it just McGraw? I'm using the Barron's book, and I have several older books too that I'm using. And I've analyzed all the verbal parts of those books, and in particular the logical reasoning, alright? Now, here's what I have found. Now, as you know, the verbal part of the SHSAT can be broken down into 3 parts itself, and that's reading comprehension, scrambled paragraphs, and logical reasoning. Now, what we're going to look at today is just logical reasoning. But not only that, I've decided to break down logical reasoning into 3 parts, alright? So, I've realized, I just made these things up, alright, that the logical reasoning consists of 3 things. And I'll explain them in a second, alright? 1, that I call relative, position, placement problems. Then we have inductive, deductive reasoning, and then we have what I call coding problems. Alright, so the logical reasoning portion of the verbal part of the SHSAT is made up of these 3 things. Now, these are categories that I've made up myself, alright, and I think they encompass all the kinds of problems that will show up on the verbal part of the logical reasoning part, which is a part of the verbal part of the SHSAT, alright? I know that's a lot of parts, alright? Bear with me. So, I'll give you an example of what each sounds like, alright? I'll even show you the book. Alright, we're using the McGraw book here now. Alright, so if someone says something like, here we go. Look at a question like this one. See, you have 4 sentences, right? Each of them have some number of words, and then above the words there are letters, and each letter there corresponds to a word in that sentence, right? So there's letters above, and then below the letters there are words. Every letter above the words in that sentence corresponds to a word in that sentence, but not necessarily the one above it. So, for example, Marie doesn't have to be M, swam doesn't have to be swam. Wow, so I thought I said swam. I don't know what I'm saying. Alright, swam doesn't have to be X, laps doesn't have to be R, like that. R could be Marie, swam, laps, herself. It could be any of those words in there, alright? So, problems like this one are coding problems. And I'll do a video on that another day, okay? So, let's see, something else. Okay, and then look at this problem. It says, 5 students are standing in a line according to their ages, from oldest to youngest, left to right. Alright, and then it gives you some facts. It says, Daniela is older than Mark, but younger than Rico. And then it says, Mark is younger than Brian, but older than Jenny. And then Brian is younger than Rico, right? So, that problem that you're seeing there is this kind of problem. A relative position placement problem. I will teach you how to solve these kinds of problems in other videos. But today's video is about this, alright? This one here, alright? That's the one we're doing today. Alright, we're going to be studying inductive/deductive reasoning. Alright, so what does that kind of problem look like? I'll show you in a moment, alright? I'll give you one. But before we go there, I mean, you can already kind of get to it by the process of elimination. By now, you're 4 weeks away from the test. You should have been doing, maybe you've done a few practice tests already that are exactly like the real SHSAT. So you've done the logical reasoning portion, and probably you know which kind of problems these are. Alright, but if you don't, it doesn't matter. We're going to go over like 3 or 4 of them right now, okay? So let me get rid of this. You already know we're studying inductive and deductive reasoning, right? So let's think of what each one means. Alright, basically what you have here is this. So, alright. Suppose you go to the park and you go really early and the park is full of kids, right? You can say, what then? Most people in the park are kids in the morning, right? For some reason, let me try this out. Alright, so you go to the park in the morning and you realize that most people in the park are kids in the morning. Most people in the park are kids in the morning. And then you also notice the park is dirty in the morning. Now, here we have two sentences that come from what? From observation. You notice two things as you walked past the park. You noticed that most of the people in the park were kids. You noticed that it was the morning. And you noticed that the park is usually dirty in the morning. What can you conclude from this information? And what kind of an argument are you making? What kind of reasoning are you using? Well, one clue is that you're using observation. If what you're using is observation or little details that you've gotten using your senses, then you're probably making an inductive argument, or you're using inductive reasoning. You're connecting things, details, right? And you're trying to go from the details to what? To a general conclusion. What would you conclude? A lot of people would be what? Tempted to conclude that kids make the park dirty, right? Most people will be tempted to make this conclusion. But is this the only kind of conclusion that you can make? And if it is, with this information, the only conclusion that you can make, is it true? Must it be true? Must. We'll be using that word a lot. Alright? Must this be true? Well, it depends, because a lot of other things happen in the morning, right? Or, as you know, and you might have guessed, something might have happened the day before, right? Last night, or the night before that one. And maybe the people only pick up the trash once a week. And it just so happens that that morning that you passed by was the morning before the morning they pick up the trash. And so it's piled up a lot, right? Leading you to believe that, well, it's dirty because the kids are there. But it's just a coincidence that kids go to the park early in the morning and that you passed by that morning, the morning before they picked up the trash, and noticed that the park was dirty, right? You may have even done this more than once because, say you visit your grandma that day, same time. Every day the same week at the same time. And you may have noticed then, because you go all the time at the same time, that the park was dirty in the morning and that the park was full of kids in the morning. And so you say the kids make the park dirty, right? That comes out of this. But it doesn't necessarily have to be true, because you'd have to collect more observations. Alright? Is this even probably true? We don't know. We really don't. It can be the fact. It can. Now here's a word that's important, can. That's not a definite word. Can means what? That it's possibly. This refers to possibility, alright? Not probability so much. Possibility. Please remember that. Possibility. Can. Alright? Can it be true that kids make the park dirty? Yes. And in fact, this here, I would say is wrong. If you say most kids, here, look, we have 1 and 2. Alright, most people in the park are kids in the morning. And then that second premise says the park is dirty in the morning. Therefore, I conclude that kids make the park dirty. I would say that's wrong. If you say kids might be making the park dirty, that's right. They might be making the park dirty. It's possible. Can. So in other words, might. Kids can be making the park dirty. Yes, that's safe to conclude from this information. Kids might be making the park dirty. That's safe to conclude from this information. But kids must be making the park dirty cannot be concluded from this information because it's based off limited evidence. Now, luckily for you, the SHSAT works with certainties most of the time. And when it doesn't, it's extremely obvious. And so you have to pay special attention to the words that they use. For example, I would advise you here in this case to pay attention to the word most. Because there are adults in the park. What if it just so happens to be that though most of the people in the park are kids, the few adults that are there are actually the ones dirtying the park? What if they are the culprits? Right? Again, there's the fact that the park might have already been dirty before the kids got there from the night before. Or it can be the fact that it was clean and it's true, it got dirty in the morning. Perhaps the park just gets really dirty in the morning. That can be a fact too. But what? It doesn't say that all the people in the park are kids in the morning. It says that most people in the park are kids in the morning. And so this here restricts the scope of the involvement of kids. They're not the only ones there. They're not running around wild and free. They have parents there supervising them, or, adults. And these adults might be responsible for the park's dirtiness, right? So, we can't say that kids make the park dirty, because when we say kids make the park dirty, we're speaking in terms of must, as if it's an absolute. And you cannot, after seeing the word most, come to a statement that ends with must. It's very difficult. It says most people in the park are kids in the morning. So you can't go from a most to a must. Okay? Can you go to the word can? Yes. Even might. Because both can and might deal with possibility. Okay? Not probability, possibility. We don't know what the probability is. It's hard to determine unless you stand around the park all day, and that would make you a bit creepy. But, again, most people in the park are kids in the morning, and then the park is dirty in the morning. Therefore, I conclude kids make the park dirty. That is wrong. It is wrong because you are talking with a lot of certainty, with a lot of authority. You're already blaming the kids, when in fact, kids aren't the only ones in the park. Plus, you don't know what the park was like before they got there. Alright? So, what kind of an argument is this? Alright, well, we went from what? Let's erase some of it if we can, or let's try to... Alright, we went from details or observations to a general conclusion. Now you have to be careful. What kind of an argument is this, by the way? We are talking about an inductive one. Inductive reasoning. Got it? This is an argument. This is an example of inductive reasoning. This here is an example of inductive reasoning. You started off with two premises. What kind of premises were they? They were based off observation. You walking past the park and noticing that most of the people in it in the morning are kids, and also you noticing when you passed by the park in the morning that the park was dirty. And then I guess maybe you were moody and that has something to do with it. What did you conclude? Kids make the park dirty. Those darn kids, right? That's the conclusion that you came up with. But that conclusion is a faulty one. It's not a sound conclusion. And the reason it's not sound is because, look, what you noticed was that most people in the park were kids. You cannot say that the kids make the park dirty unless you witnessed it over and over again. You can't say that the kids make the park dirty if all you observed was that most of the people in the park were kids, because they were also adults, and they may be responsible for its dirtiness. Plus, you weren't there the night before. Might have been dirty too. And so it is impossible to jump from the most to the must. Because must speaks of what? Must speaks of certainty. Must, is, and will be. Alright, speak of certainty. Got that? Alright, so that's inductive reasoning. Now, whenever you hear people stereotype or generalize, they're usually using inductive reasoning, and they're usually using it very poorly, right? They're usually going from most. Okay? So, let's say you go to you go to have dinner at a restaurant. You walk in, and it's like, it's a special day. It's your birthday. You're with your parents or with your friends, and you really want this to be special. And you paid a lot of money for this dinner, and you get there, and you sit down. 5 minutes after you sit down, a whole crowd, like a big crowd of teenagers, walk in, right? And they start making a ruckus, a bunch of noise and slamming things and laughing out loud and blasting their phones, loud music, right? They're not considerate. What will you say? Darn kids, right? Damn teens, they ruin everything. And you get moody because they ruined your birthday. What you're doing here, when you say, oh, why are teens so disruptive? And you start speaking that way. Why do teens have to be this way? You're using inductive reasoning. What you're doing is seeing an example, so an example counts, or using an observation, a detail, and then jumping to a conclusion. You're generalizing. You're saying that all teens are that way, when in fact we know we have to. I mean, when we're in a good mood perhaps, surely you've seen this before, that some kids really don't come out that often. Most of the time, they stay home, right? Some kids are like that. They just read books at home. They go on YouTube. Sound familiar? Alright? So, or when people say, oh, those kind of people steal. Those kind of people kill. Those kind of people discriminate. Whenever you hear someone say those kinds of people, as if they're talking about all of them, and they are in fact talking about all of them, they're talking about all of them while really only witnessing some of them. Now, if everyone has seen every single teenager in the world that's ever existed, somehow, suppose someone has lived forever. So this doesn't even make sense. And that one person has witnessed every single teenager ever, and has noticed, based on observation, that every single teenager ever is noisy and disruptive, then that person can conclude that teenagers are, or must be, what? Noisy and disruptive, right? But no one has seen every teenager ever, and so they can't conclude it. And that's the same about everyone. When everyone says, oh, those kinds of people are bad people. Have they met everyone? Every single person? Like that person? I don't think so. And so they're using a small sample, alright? A small sample. We could put that here too. Small sample. And from that small sample, they're coming to a general conclusion. They're generalizing. They're stereotyping. Okay? So beware. And that's an example of inductive reasoning. Okay? We're going to talk about what kind of a role inductive reasoning plays in the logical reasoning portion of the SHSAT in a moment. I want to get on with something else, and let me see if there's something else that I should bring up. Ah, there is. Alright, so let's start a new argument. Alright? So, let's also summarize. Alright, so what are we going on about? We're going on about inductive reasoning. Alright, and we're talking about the difficulty of going from words that are restrictive. What are restrictive words? Words that don't let you include everyone into that statement, like some. Some people are tall. That statement doesn't say that all people are tall. It says that some people are tall. So it gets the scope of that statement, and it takes it away from everyone, and it shrinks it down to just some people. Some, many, most, rarely. Can you think of some? Let me see if I wrote down any. I'm kind of just doing this on the spot and see if let's see. Well, there you have them. Some, many, most, rarely, usually, often. None of these, none convey certainty, right? None of them. If I say, I often find money on the floor on my way to work. Well, you can't say, oh, I want to hang out with you, because I'd like some money. Let me walk with you to work. Because it doesn't mean you're going to find some. Even if I find some often. Or I usually have a bad day on Mondays. That doesn't mean I'm going to have a bad day every single Monday. It just means that I usually have a bad day on Mondays. Alright? If I say, I rarely see a car accident, that doesn't mean I won't ever see a car accident. I might. Okay? So these here, none of these convey certainty. They don't. These are restrictive words. And it's hard to go from a restrictive word to an absolute one. Alright? So what's an absolute word like? Never. Always. Must. Will be. Sometimes is. Alright, this is an exception perhaps. Is, will be, must, never, always. All these words are absolute. Alright, if I told you I have never punched someone, you shouldn't be able to talk to anyone who's reliable who should ever tell you that I have, because then I'd be lying. Alright? If I tell you, well, we'll come up with another example, because I do want to practice some, but I want to get on to deductive reasoning, alright? We're still in inductive reasoning, but we're slowly transitioning into deductive reasoning, because this is just as useful for both. What you have to know and be careful about is going from restrictive words to absolutes. It's very difficult, almost impossible, alright? So, we'll say that it doesn't happen, right? So, let's get fancy. Let's see if we can find that we probably won't. I have like the worst luck ever. Alright, here. Let's say this. Alright. It's difficult or impossible to go from a restrictive word, from restrictive premises to an absolute conclusion. From a restrictive premise to an absolute conclusion. Alright, so let's come up with some. This time, by the way, inductive reasoning sometimes is called bottom up reasoning. Why? Because you start with the small things. You start with small observations, and from that, you build your way up to a general conclusion. Alright, so let's try some anyways before I end this video. Now, if the camera shuts off, because it does sometimes when it reaches 25 minutes because of storage problems, then I'll just continue with the second video for inductive reasoning, alright? So, actually, let's leave that there. Let's think of this. Ready? Take notes too, alright? I'm erasing things, but you can always pause it. It's a video. So, what if I say, let's cut this off. Alright. Let's say I went to a trip, a safari trip, and I noticed that all, let's see, all hippos I saw were brown. Oh look, the word all is there. Is it safe for me to conclude that all hippos therefore are brown? Well, I went on my trip and say I saw 50 hippos. Is it safe to conclude because I saw 50 hippos that all hippos are brown? Think about that for just a moment. I think the video is going to turn off, and just in case it does, I'll turn it off preemptively and start a new video, alright? But in the meantime, I do want you to think about this. Did I see every single hippo on my safari trip? Or did I just see a few? Maybe even I saw many, but did I see all of them? Did I see all the hippos? That's the question I'm asking you, alright? Can I conclude safely that all hippos are brown? Are brown. Are is like is. It conveys, so we can put are here. Are is like is. It conveys certainty. It's an absolute. Okay? Can I conclude that all hippos are brown because all the hippos that I saw were brown? I don't know. What if someone else goes on a safari trip to the same exact place and sees a hippo there and it's black? What happens to my conclusion then? That one exception, or maybe it's not an exception, perhaps there's like a whole group of black hippos, and that group of black hippos disproves my conclusion. I just happen not to see that group of black hippos, right? And so it's important to be careful, because what does it come down to again? A sample. Samples matter. You need a large sample, and you will remember this from probability, right? If you've been studying probability, you'll know the importance of a sample, okay? So if you studied it very thoroughly, you'll remember about how there was ideal probability and empirical probability, right? And how ideal probability says that if you flip a coin, you have 1 out of 2 chances of landing on heads or tails. So say you're selecting for heads, it's 1 out of 2. And yet in real life, you could flip a coin, and it could land on tails, 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 4 times in a row, tails. Well, does that say that tails is like the side that's landed on more frequently? That it's like a trustier side? That it's the side that you should choose if you had to make a bet? No, because there's still really 2 choices, and tails still represents just one of those choices, so you do indeed have 1 out of 2 in terms of ideal probability. But then how, you might ask, did you get 4 tails in a row? Well, it's because for every 4 tails in a row that you get, someone somewhere else gets 4 heads in a row. And in fact, you could be that someone too if you just keep flipping that coin. Eventually, if you flip the coin enough times, you land on heads 4 times too, perhaps more. It's hard to tell, but if you chart this all up and bundle it up together, as I have with my students, you'll see that it actually does turn out to be very close to what ideal probability says it should be, which is 50%, right? 1 over 2. Anyways, it's closely related. Samples. If you have a small sample, you might have the illusion of certainty. You could say, but I saw 200 hippos, and all 200 of the hippos that I saw were brown, and therefore hippos must be brown. But that's not the way it works, alright? So be careful again. All hippos I saw were brown, therefore. Therefore is a word that you use when you're about to go into conclusion territory, right? When you're little and you write essays, you write in conclusion, but you could write therefore, or thus. Alright? There's a lot of words that you can use that indicate you're about to start your conclusion. So, suppose I say all hippos I saw were brown, therefore, all hippos must be brown, right? Must be brown. All hippos must be brown. Be careful, alright? So again, we're still in the territory of inductive reasoning, okay? And now we're going to go on and move on to deductive reasoning, and then I'm going to show you why this all matters, because as of now, you're probably thinking this has nothing to do with the SHSAT. But those of you who are thinking ahead already see that these words are indeed familiar. And believe it or not, your imagination counts. Alright? And you'll see how in a moment. And practice with questions like the ones I'm going to give you, with exercises like the ones I'm going to give you, will make you very, very good at getting these kinds of questions in the logical reasoning right. Alright? So there's 3 kinds of questions inside of logical reasoning. Alright? And we're focusing on just the inductive/deductive kind. There are still those that have to do with relative placement/position, and then the other kind that has to do with coding. Those will be covered in other videos. This video covers only inductive reasoning/deductive reasoning, and it won't be just one video long. Alright? It will be a series. So stay tuned. I'll put this one up now, and in a few you will see the rest, alright? And you'll get your examples, and you'll have something to study from, and you will see how you will improve, alright? So I'll give you some examples too in case your books only provides like 4 or 5. I'll try to give you many. That way you have more study material, alright? See you soon.